Welcome to the deep dive. Have you ever wondered how something universally acclaimed, a real marvel of human ingenuity, could just vanish?
It makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
Imagine a wonder so grand it felt almost alive, a testament to divine power, human ambition. Yet today, it exists only in, whispered legends and maybe some scholarly debates. How does a monument that profound simply disappear from history?
It's a fascinating question. Something built with such incredible skill, such purpose, and now it's just these ancient accounts and, scattered clues from other finds.
Absolutely. And that's exactly our mission today. We're taking a deep dive into the astonishing story of Phidias' statue of Zeus at Olympia, one of the legendary seven wonders of the ancient world. We'll be pulling back curtain on its entire lore, really, from its ambitious conception and the sheer genius behind its creation to its profound impact on ancient viewers, and of course the competing, pretty contentious theories surrounding its mysterious demise.
And you've given us a fantastic stack of sources for this deep dive. We're talking detailed accounts from ancient travelers like Pausanias, the incredible insights we've gained from modern archaeological discoveries.
Yeah, those are key.
And some really fascinating analyses of its enduring cultural echoes. It's quite a collection.
Our mission, then, is to extract the most important nuggets, connect the dots, and really try to understand not just what it was, but what it meant, to the ancient world and maybe even beyond. So what does this all mean for us today? Let's unpack this.
Sounds great. Where do we begin?
Well, to truly understand the Zeus, I think we really need to set the scene. Imagine the sacred ground where this masterpiece would eventually rise, a place unlike any other in the ancient Greek world, Olympia.
Right.
When we think of ancient Greek cities, we often picture, bustling city-states like Athens or Sparta. But Olympia was different, wasn't it?
It was a fascinating exception, definitely. Olympia wasn't a typical polis, not a city-state in the way we usually think of them. It was actually a unique, sacred Panhellenic sanctuary.
Panhellenic, meaning for all Greeks.
Exactly. Think of it more like neutral ground, a consecrated space. It was administered by the nearby smaller polis of Elis, but its significance went way beyond that. This neutrality was absolutely crucial because it allowed Olympia to host the Olympic Games.
The Olympic Games.
Yes, and this wasn't just some local sports day. It was a massive quadrennial festival happening every 4 years, combining athletic competition with really deeply significant religious ceremony. It was a unifying force for the entire Greek world.
So it drew people from all over, kind of transcending those local rivalries you always hear about.
Precisely. The Olympic Games were truly pan-Hellenic. They involved and drew participants, dignitaries, spectators from across the entire Greek-speaking world. We're talking from Sicily, way over in the west, all the way to Asia Minor in the east.
Wow, that's a huge area.
It made Olympia this focal point for shared Greek culture and identity. And the games themselves were held specifically in honor of Zeus Olympios, the king of the gods. That really cemented the sanctuary's role as his preeminent place of worship.
So anything built there, especially something for Zeus, would have had this unparalleled reach. A huge statement of cultural and, artistic prestige across the whole Hellenic world.
Absolutely. It was the biggest stage imaginable in many ways.
And by the mid-5th century BCE, this already massively important site, it really hit its stride, didn't it? It was during this period, I gather, that the administrators undertook the construction of a monumental temple to Zeus, designed by a local architect, Laban of Elis. What did this temple signify at the time?
Well, this temple of Zeus, built roughly between 472 and 456 BCE, was really a canonical masterpiece of the Doric architectural order. It was designed to be monumental from the start, and when it was finished, it was truly immense, the largest temple in the Peloponnese at that time.
How big are we talking? Can you give us a sense of the scale?
Okay, imagine its foundational platform, the stylobate, basically the massive base the columns rested on. It stretched longer than 2 basketball courts. And it had 6 massive collars on its facade, its front, and 13 along its flanks, the sides. Each of those columns towered to a height equivalent to, say, a modern 3-story building.
That's genuinely colossal for its time. And the materials sound quite ingenious, too. Not all marble.
No, not entirely. The primary building material was actually a local limestone, one rich in shells. Now, to give it that gleaming appearance of much costlier marble, they covered this limestone with a fine layer of white stucco.
Clever trick.
Very. But they did use true Peperian marble, the really good stuff, known for its luminosity, for the roof tiles, and crucially for the elaborate sculptural program that adorned the building.
Right, because even before the legendary statue of Zeus arrived, this temple was already a showstopper, packed with incredible sculptures telling these profound mythological stories.
Exactly right. It was already a repository of some of the finest sculpture of what we call the early classical period. Take the East Pediment, for example. That's the big triangular space above the main entrance. This depicted the moment of tense stillness just before the mythical chariot race between Pelops and King Oenomaus. That's a foundational myth for the whole Peloponnese region. And right at the apex, the highest point, stood the imposing figure of Zeus himself, presiding over the solemn oath-taking before the race began.
And who carved that? Do we know?
Well, the ancient traveler Pausanias, writing centuries later but providing invaluable detail, attributed this magnificent work to the sculptor Phidias.
Okay. And then on the other side, the West Pediment, that offered a pretty dramatic contrast, right? Much more action-packed.
It certainly did. The West Pediment featured a far more dynamic, even violent scene, the Centauromachi. That's the brutal battle between the civilized Lapiths and the wild, bestial centaurs at the wedding feast of Pirithous.
A classic theme, order versus chaos.
Exactly. It was a very popular metaphor in Greek art for the triumph of Greek order and civilization over barbarian chaos. And this whole chaotic scene was dominated by the serene yet commanding central figure of the god Apollo. Pausanias again names the sculptor as Alcamenes, who was actually a contemporary of Phidias.
Interesting connection there. And let's not forget the metopes, those carved panels.
Right, the 12 metopes located above the inner porches, 6 at each end. These depicted the famous labors of Heracles, Zeus's son, the quintessential Greek hero.
So the temple itself was already just steeped in these narratives of divine justice, heroic struggle, regional myths. It was a magnificent and symbolically charged space, even before the main event, so to speak.
Absolutely, a masterpiece in its own right.
That temple sounds like an incredible achievement. But if it was already such a marvel, the question just hangs there, doesn't it? Why, after more than 2 decades, did the Eleans decide they needed something even grander inside its walls? This brings us to the really fascinating story of the statue of Zeus's commissioning. There's this significant chronological gap you mentioned. More than 20 years between the temple's completion around 457 BCE and the statue's creation around 435 BCE.
And that gap is crucial. It really strongly suggests that a colossal gold and ivory chryselephantine statue was not part of Liban's original architectural plan for the temple.
So for a whole generation, they were basically happy with the temple as it was.
It certainly seems that way. The Eleans appeared content. The widely accepted theory for why they suddenly embarked on this monumental undertaking points to a very specific catalyst: the unveiling of Phidias's Athena Parthenos in Athens.
Oh, the great rival.
Exactly. Dedicated in 438 BCE, that statue set an incredibly high new standard for artistic magnificence and, just as importantly, civic prestige.
So it was essentially an artistic arms race, a form of interpolis competition, keeping up with the Athenians.
Precisely that. In that climate of intense rivalry between Greek city-states, the Eleans sought to match, maybe even surpass, Athens. And how better to do that than by hiring the very same master sculptor, Phidias himself, for their own patron deity, Zeus.
Go big or go home, basically. Hire the competition's star player.
You could put it that way. And this wasn't just about bragging rights, it was a statement of ambition on the grandest scale.
Yeah.
We even have physical evidence from the temple ruins that supports this idea of a competitive insertion.
What kind of evidence?
Well, the installation of Phidias's massive seated figure necessitated pretty substantial modifications to the temple's inner chamber, the cella. To fit the statue and its enormous throne, the 2 rows of interior columns and their bases, their stylobates, had to be dismantled and physically repositioned.
That's major structural work.
Oh, absolutely. A huge alteration, one that likely even required retiling parts of the roof.
So, the statue of Zeus wasn't simply the grand finale of Liban's original temple design. It was this monumental, politically motivated addition. It fundamentally reshaped a pre-existing sacred space, all to assert Olympia's primacy in the Hellenic world. That's a powerful insight.
It changes how you view the whole project.
And the man chosen for this task? Phidias. Well, and he was already a legend by this point, wasn't he?
He was, without question, the most celebrated artist of the High Classical period. He was the creative force behind Pericles' incredibly ambitious building program on the Athenian Acropolis.
Right, the Parthenon and all that.
Exactly. And ancient critics didn't just praise his technical skill, which was obviously immense, they particularly lauded his ethos, his unique ability to capture the essential moral and divine character of his subjects. He was really seen as the primary architect of the classical Greek sculptural style, perfecting this idealized vision of both divinity and humanity.
And his work on the Athena Parthenos. That was essentially the direct predecessor, wasn't it? A technical and conceptual blueprint for the Zeus. That massive gold and ivory statue, 12 meters tall, dedicated in 438 BCE. That must have been where he mastered the immense challenges of building something so huge from wood, gold, and ivory.
Exactly. It was the proof of concept, if you like. And even its creation was steeped in high-stakes Athenian politics. Phidias found himself accused by Pericles' political enemies of embezzling gold intended for the statue.
Ah, yes, that whole controversy. How did that play out?
Well, according to Plutarch, Phidias had actually anticipated such a charge. Quite cleverly, he had constructed the golden plates of Athena's robe so they could be removed.
No way.
Yes, so they could be taken off and weighed, proving his innocence when the accusations flew. But unfortunately, that wasn't the end of his troubles in Athens.
What happened next?
Though he was exonerated of the theft charge, Phidias immediately faced an even more serious accusation: impiety or sacrilege. He was accused of including portraits of himself, a sort of balding old man, and his patron Pericles on the relief carvings of Athena's shield depicting the Battle of the Amazons.
Ah, putting mortals on sacred ground, basically. Big no-no. And his fate after this, it gets a bit murky, doesn't it?
It does. The historical accounts really conflict here. Some sources, like Plutarch, claim Phidias was imprisoned in Athens and actually died there, perhaps of illness or poison.
Grim.
But there's another strong tradition suggesting he escaped or was perhaps exiled from Athens. And if so, he made his way to Olympia, where, frankly, his unparalleled reputation would have made him the absolutely obvious choice for the Eleans' grand project.
And there's even a third, darker version.
There is a variant mentioned by a later commentator, a scholiast on Aristophanes, suggesting the Eleans themselves actually put Phidias to death after he completed the Zeus statue for reasons that remain obscure. Highly unlikely, most scholars think, but it's out there.
Wow. So regardless of his exact fate, his arrival at Olympia, whenever it was, marked the beginning of what many ancients considered his last and perhaps greatest masterpiece.
That seems the most likely scenario. He leaves Athens under a cloud, perhaps, and undertakes this final, monumental commission.
So he wasn't just seen as a craftsman, but something more profound. Ancient writers called him a visual theologian, someone who gave definitive, enduring form to the Greek deities.
That's the language they used, yes. They said he established forever general conceptions of Zeus and Athena. One writer even claimed that he alone had seen the exact image of the gods and that he revealed it to man. That sounds much more like religious revelation than just art criticism, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's like he was channeling the divine. And wasn't there a story about his inspiration for the Zeus from Homer?
Yes, that's a famous anecdote. When asked what model he used for his Zeus, Phidias reportedly cited a really powerful passage from Book 1 of Homer's Iliad. It's where Zeus confirms a promise to Thetis with a nod.
Let me see if I remember. He spoke, the son of Cronos, and nodded his head with the dark brows.
And the immortality-anointed hair of the great god swept from his divine head, and all Olympus was shaken. That was his model, Homer's epic evocation of supreme, earth-shattering power.
Incredible.
And based on the overwhelming testimony of ancient viewers, people who actually stood before it and felt they had seen the god in person, it seems he succeeded. He managed to create not just a statue, but an actual epiphany.
So in doing so, Phidias didn't just decorate a temple, he effectively defined a god for an entire civilization. He created the canonical image of divine majesty that would persist for 1,000 years.
That's the scale of his achievement, yes.
That's an incredible ambition to define a god's image for a whole culture. And what's truly amazing for us looking back is that we're not just relying on ancient texts for the story of his creation. The legendary accounts of how the statue was made were grounded in tangible reality, weren't they, with the archaeological rediscovery of Phidias's workshop?
Yes. Between 1954 and 1958, that discovery was monumental in itself. It provided truly unprecedented insight into the materials, the techniques, and just the sheer logistical complexity involved in producing such a colossal work back in the 5th century BCE.
Where was it, and what did it look like?
The excavations revealed a large rectangular building situated directly west of the Temple of Zeus, just outside the sacred precinct wall, the Altus. And crucially, its main hall had the exact same dimensions as the temple's cella, the inner sanctum where the statue would eventually stand.
It can't be a coincidence. It
Yeah.
must have been like a purpose-built model space.
Exactly. It seems purpose-built. This arrangement allowed Phidias and his team to construct and, importantly, pre-assemble large sections of the statue. They could accurately judge their proportions, see how the light played upon the surfaces, gauge the overall visual impact under conditions that precisely mimicked the final setting within the temple.
Like a massive prototyping lab or a full-scale mock-up. So what did they actually find inside this workshop?
Oh, the artifacts unearthed within its ruins really tell the story of the statue's fabrication. Archaeologists found a wealth of materials, specialized tools for working gold and ivory, numerous ivory chippings, literally the shavings left over from carving the statue's skin.
Wow, leftovers from the god himself.
Kind of. Pieces of semi-precious stone and amber, presumably for inlay work, and, really significantly, a large number of terracotta molds.
Molds for casting metal parts.
Well, we'll get to that. It's slightly different, but perhaps the most personal and evocative discovery, the one that really connects us, was a small, plain, black glazed wine cup, an oinoko, a sort of pitcher, and scratched carefully onto its base were the words, "As I belong to Phidias."
No way, Phidias' actual cup.
Seems very likely a direct, intimate, human link to the master himself amidst all this monumental creation.
That's incredible. A truly human touch. Okay, let's talk about the technique itself, the Crescolophantine method.
Right.
Gold and ivory. The name itself sounds luxurious.
It does. From the Greek chrysos for gold and elephantinos for ivory, it describes this composite sculptural technique that was reserved for only the most prestigious, most important cult statues. The process, as revealed by both the workshop finds and ancient descriptions, was extraordinarily complex.
How did it work, basically?
Well, at its core, there was an internal armature, a framework. Probably made of wood, though some have suggested stone or metal elements too. This served as a robust skeleton for the statue's immense form. And onto this wooden core, the outer panels were attached.
Okay, so the flesh of the god, the visible skin, that was the ivory.
Exactly. That was composed of meticulously carved plates of ivory. These plates, making up the god's face, his torso, arms, feet, all the exposed skin were carefully fitted together like a giant jigsaw puzzle and affixed somehow to the wooden core. Once assembled and polished, the seams were apparently almost invisible, giving the appearance of a single gleaming surface that really did emulate living flesh.
Amazing. And then the gold for the clothes and hair.
Right. The magnificent gilded drapery and adornments, the god's robe, his beard, his hair, his sandals, these were made of hammered gold panels, likely attached over the wooden core as well.
But you mentioned those terracotta molds found in the workshop.
Mm-hmm.
They hinted at something even more innovative for the robe, didn't they? Not just plain gold.
They did, and this is fascinating. Analysis showed many of these molds were not for shaping metal directly, as you might expect. Instead, they were used for creating plaques of colored glass.
Glass on the statue of Zeus.
Yes. These glass pieces, formed into intricate patterns, Pausanias mentions animals and lilies, were then likely gilded, perhaps backed with gold foil, and attached to the robe. Imagine this incredibly rich, multi-textured, brilliantly colored garment that would have shimmered and caught the light in amazing ways.
That adds a whole new dimension. It wasn't just gold and ivory.
No, it was a multimedia masterpiece. And beyond that, the final work was a symphony of precious materials. The throne and the scepter were further adorned with ebony, silver, copper, enamel, inset jewels, showcasing the full range of luxury materials available to a master craftsman with a massive budget.
So, piecing this together, it sounds like it wasn't just built entirely on-site inside the temple. The evidence points more towards a modular construction process.
That's right. The statue was almost certainly created in numerous individual sections within the workshop, an arm here, part of the torso there, sections of the throne. These were then transported the short distance across to the temple and painstakingly assembled in their final position inside the cella.
That really changes our understanding, doesn't it, of how such a masterpiece was created. This wasn't the solitary act of a lone genius chipping away at a single block of marble in his studio.
Not at all. It was a complex, almost quasi-industrial enterprise. It required immense logistical coordination just to get the materials.
So, Phidias wasn't just an artist. He was also a master project director. It kind of challenges our romanticized view of ancient artistry, revealing the sheer scale of ambition and organization needed to build a wonder like this.
Absolutely. Think about it. The variety of materials, gold, ivory from Africa or Asia, ebony, exotic stones implies sophisticated supply chains reaching across the Mediterranean. And the specialized tools and the molds, they point to a large, collaborative team of artisans.
What kind of specialists?
You'd need master carpenters to build the huge internal armature, expert ivory carvers, goldsmiths, jewelers, glassmakers, probably painters for certain details, all working under Phidias's master direction.
And the molds suggest standardization.
Exactly. The terracotta molds, especially for decorative elements like the glass plaques, suggest a system of standardized production. This allows for both efficiency during the initial construction and, perhaps crucially, the potential for future repairs and replacements if parts got damaged over the centuries.
That makes sense.
So, Phidias must be understood not only as a supreme artist, but as a master project director, overseeing a complex technical and logistical operation on a scale rarely seen in the ancient world.
It's incredible to imagine that workshop buzzing with activity, almost like an ancient factory floor dedicated to creating a god. And even though the statue itself is irretrievably lost to us, those detailed accounts from ancient sources, especially Pausanias in the 2nd century CE, allow us to embark on a remarkably vivid reconstruction, don't they? What did it actually look like?
Well, the first thing, the most immediate and overwhelming feature everyone commented on was its sheer size. Ancient sources consistently place its height at around 12.4 meters. That's approximately 41 feet.
41 feet. That's like a modern 4-story building.
Exactly. And this colossal figure was confined within the relatively narrow space of the temple's cella. It occupied maybe half the width of the central aisle and rose so high that its head nearly touched the ceiling.
That must have been an absolutely incredible sight. Almost claustrophobic, maybe? Overwhelming?
It was meant to be overwhelming, I think. And this deliberate disproportion, the massive statue crammed into the architectural space, created a profound psychological effect. The geographer Strabo, writing in the 1st century BCE, famously articulated this. He said, "It gave the impression that if Zeus arose and stood erect, he would unroof the temple."
Right, I've heard that quote. It sounds like a criticism, but it wasn't.
No, not at all. It's generally taken as a testament to the statue's incredible success in conveying this sense of immense, contained power. Power that both awed and completely dwarfed the mortal viewer standing before it.
Okay, so what did Zeus himself look like? How did Phidias actually depict the king of the gods? Was he angry, throwing thunderbolts?
No, interestingly, Phidias's depiction marked a significant evolution in how Zeus was shown. He wasn't the dynamic, action-posed, thunderbolt-wielding god you might see in earlier archaic art. This Zeus was a majestic, enthroned sovereign.
Like a king on his throne.
Exactly. The embodiment of divine order, serene authority. A perfect visual representation of that high classical ideal. His exposed flesh face, torso, arms, feet was rendered in that polished ivory, giving him this luminous, almost alive appearance. He was crowned with a sculpted wreath of olive sprays, beautifully crafted in gold. His golden sandals rested upon a footstool below.
And his robe. You mentioned the gold and the glass.
Yes, his magnificent robe, the himation, was made of gold, but intricately decorated with those gilded glass carvings. Pausanias described animals and lilies, adding color and texture and sparkle.
And what symbols of his power did he hold? He must have held something.
Oh, absolutely. In his outstretched right hand, Zeus held a small but also chryselephantine statue of Nike, the winged goddess of victory.
A statue within a statue.
Exactly. And Pausanias notes that this Nike figure was roughly life-size, so quite substantial itself, and considered a masterpiece in its own right, complete with a ribbon and a garland. Its presence clearly symbolized Zeus as the ultimate source of all triumph and success.
And in the other hand?
Yeah.
His left.
In his left hand, he grasped a tall scepter. Pausanias described it as being ornamented with every kind of metal, which suggests incredibly intricate craftsmanship. And perched right on top of the scepter was an eagle, the god's sacred bird and messenger, symbolizing his absolute dominion over the heavens and the earth.
Okay, but the throne itself. I've read descriptions, and it sounds like it was almost a universe in miniature, a complex work of art all on its own.
It absolutely was. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was integral to the statue's meaning. Constructed primarily of cedar wood, it was then lavishly decorated with gold, ivory, ebony, precious stones, just about every luxury material imaginable.
And covered in carvings and paintings.
Completely. Pausanias gives us this invaluable, though at times almost dizzying, tour of its intricate iconography. It was clearly designed to be a kind of visual curriculum, teaching the viewer about divine justice, heroism, mythology, the very order of the cosmos, all within Zeus's immediate sphere.
Like what specifically?
Okay, so on the legs and supports, you had graceful dancing victories, Nikes. On the front feet, there were reliefs of Theban children being seized by sphinxes, a rather grim mythological scene. And below them, Apollo and Artemis slaying the children of Niobe, which was a famous story serving as a solemn warning against mortal hubris, against challenging the gods.
Wow, heavy themes.
Very. The cross struts between the legs were decorated with scenes of athletic contests, perhaps reflecting the Olympics, and legendary battles like Heracles and Theseus fighting the Amazons. The arms of the throne were supported by sphinxes, and above the god's head on the backrest, Phidias sculpted figures of the three graces, Charites on one side, and the three seasons, Horai, on the other, personifications of divine beauty and cosmic order.
And weren't there painted panels, too?
Yes, Pausanias mentions screens set between the legs of the throne were adorned with paintings by Phidias' nephew and collaborator Paninus. He mentions subjects like Heracles relieving Atlas of the burden of the heavens. So the whole throne just whispered these tales of power, beauty, myth, and justice.
That's an astonishing level of detail and embedded meaning. And the base and the footstool also had their own decorations. And then there was that famous reflecting pool in front.
Yes, the entire ensemble statue and throne was placed upon a massive pedestal made of dark black Eleusinian marble. This foundation was so grand it was a work of art in itself, apparently decorated with a relief depicting the birth of Aphrodite from the sea foam.
Even the base told a story.
Right. And the god's feet rested upon that footstool, which Pausanias says was supported by two golden lions and decorated with another relief, this time an Amazonomachy, a battle with the Amazons. And then, yes, in front of the statue, the temple floor wasn't paved with the usual stone slabs, but with black marble surrounded by a raised marble rim. This created a shallow basin.
And this basin was kept filled with olive oil.
Olive oil, yes. Which seems strange at first, but it had a really interesting dual purpose.
Okay, what were they?
Well, practically the climate at Olympia, down in the Altus Grove, was quite damp, marshy even. The constant presence of oil was thought to help counteract this, maintaining a stable level of moisture that prevented the precious ivory plates of the statue from drying out, shrinking, or cracking over the centuries.
Ah, like a giant humidor for the ivory. Makes sense.
Exactly. But the aesthetic impact was probably even more profound. Imagine the dark, still surface of the oil. It would have created this shimmering, unstable reflection of the colossal golden and ivory statue looming above it. It would effectively double its apparent height and contribute massively to an ethereal, otherworldly atmosphere for the viewer standing before it. A masterstroke, really.
It sounds completely calculated for maximum effect. And then there are those famous little anecdotes, the bits of gossip or legend that bring a human and divine drama to the story, like the claim about Phidias immortalizing his beloved.
Ah, yes. The gossip that Phidias immortalized his Eromenos, his young male beloved, supposedly a wrestler named Pantarches who had won at Olympia. The story went that Phidias carved Pantarches' kelos, meaning Pantarches is beautiful, into Zeus's little finger.
On the god's finger. Bit risky.
Maybe.
Wow.
And some sources add he also included a relief of the boy crowning himself on one of the barriers around the throne. Whether it's true or just ancient gossip, who knows? But it adds this charming, if slightly scandalous, human layer to the tale.
And the other famous story, the divine sanction one.
Right, the legend that upon completing the work, Phidias prayed for a sign from Zeus himself, asking if the statue was to his liking. And immediately a thunderbolt struck the temple floor right in front of the statue, but without causing any damage.
Zeus giving his seal of approval.
Exactly. The spot was supposedly thereafter enclosed with a low wall and marked with a bronze urn, a sacred spot within the sacred space. These stories, whether literally true or not, really underscore the intense belief in the statue's sacred nature and its powerful connection to the divine.
And the ancient impressions, the reactions of people who actually saw it, they really emphasize this psychological and spiritual impact, don't they? Pausanias, even after giving all those meticulous details, admitted that mere measurements fall far short of the impression made by a sight of the image.
Absolutely. And Strabo, of course, with his famous quip about Zeus needing to take the roof off if he stood up again, capturing that sense of immense power.
And Diochrysostom, he described an almost therapeutic effect.
Yes, he spoke of the overwhelming emotional and spiritual impact, saying the statue was capable of making a man forget all his earthly troubles. And the Roman historian Livy, recounting the reaction of the general Aemilius Paulus, captured that profound spiritual experience perfectly, feeling as if he had seen the god in person.
These aren't just descriptions of appreciating art. They're describing a powerful, maybe even transformative encounter.
That seems to be the consistent message, yes.
So it's really clear that this statue was far, far more than just a monumental work of art. It was the vibrant heart of a living religious sanctuary. In ancient Greek belief, a temple, a naos, wasn't just a fancy building. It was literally the dwelling place of the deity.
Mm-hmm. House of the god.
And the cult statue within was considered the physical embodiment of that god's spirit or essence. It was vastly more important than the architectural shell that housed it.
Precisely. So worshippers didn't just, admire the statue of Zeus's art. They believed they were entering into the very presence of the incarnate god. Prayers were addressed directly to this physical manifestation. Sacrifices were performed before it. The profound spiritual and emotional transformation it could evoke is really evident in those surviving accounts from people who actually saw it.
Like you mentioned, the Roman general Aemilius Paulus. Here's this seasoned, probably quite pragmatic military commander. He sees the statue after his victory over Macedon in 167 BCE, and Livy records that he was moved to his soul as if he had seen the god in person. That's not a casual tourist remark, is it?
Not at all. It speaks volumes. And then you have the Greek orator and philosopher Dio Chrysostom, writing much later in 97 CE. In his Olympic discourse, he actually uses the statue as the central focus of a complex philosophical argument about the nature of God and how humans perceive the divine. And he declares that any person, no matter how burdened by sorrow or hardship, upon seeing the image would forget all the terrors and hardships that fall to our human lot. Quite a claim.
That's incredible, almost like a religious experience curing earthly woes. And didn't Philo of Byzantium, one of the guys who listed the seven wonders, explicitly set the Zeus apart from the others?
He did. He made a crucial distinction. He said something like, "While we merely wonder at the other six, for the Zeus, we kneel in front of this one in reverence because the execution of the skill is as incredible as the image of Zeus is holy."
Reverence, not just wonder. That's key.
It highlights that difference between aesthetic admiration and genuine religious awe.
Which brings us nicely to its role as the absolute centerpiece of the Olympic Games. Its location at Olympia ensured it was the spiritual heart of the most important festival in the entire Greek world.
Without a doubt. Every 4 years, you had athletes, dignitaries, pilgrims flooding in from hundreds of city-states, all gathering for the Olympic Games, held specifically in Zeus's honor. The official rites, the grand sacrifices, would have taken place right there in the shadow of his temple. And for most pilgrims, a visit inside to behold the god within his cella was the absolute culminating experience of the whole journey.
So it wasn't just about watching the athletics, it was deeply spiritual, a pilgrimage.
Indeed. The statue thus served as this incredibly powerful symbol of pan-Hellenic identity, a shared object of reverence that, at least temporarily, superseded the constant political rivalries and warfare of the Greek world. Everyone acknowledged this, Zeus.
And this perception of the statue as a living embodiment of the god, it was further reinforced by these popular legends that circulated for centuries, wasn't it? Stories that attributed to it a kind of sentience, divine power.
Yes, and these stories, whether strictly true or apocryphal, reveal the depth of the awe it inspired. They reinforce the idea that this wasn't just inert gold and ivory.
Like the tale we mentioned, of Zeus signifying his approval of the finished work with that harmless thunderbolt. That served as a foundational myth, didn't it? Divine sanction from the get-go.
Exactly. It established its sacred credentials right away. And perhaps even more dramatic was the story told about the Roman Emperor Caligula's failed attempt at sacrilege in the 1st century CE.
Ah, Caligula. What did he try to do?
Well, the story goes that he, in his characteristic megalomania, wanted to move the statue to Rome so he could replace its head with a portrait of himself.
Oh, classic Caligula. That wouldn't go down well.
Apparently not with Zeus. According to the historian Suetonius, his plan was supernaturally thwarted. As the workmen were erecting the scaffolding needed to dismantle the statue, it uttered such a peal of laughter that the scaffoldings collapsed and the workmen took to their heels.
The statue laughed them out of the temple. That's fantastic.
Whether it happened or not, the legend itself functioned as this potent parable against mortal hubris, against messing with the gods, and a powerful affirmation of the statue's sacred inviolability. Don't try to steal Zeus.
So it wasn't just art. It wasn't just a symbol. It was genuinely perceived as an engine of faith.
That's a really good way to put it. I think the cumulative effect of all these elements, its colossal scale, the precious otherworldly materials, the ingenious use of light and reflection, and these circulating legends, created what can only be understood as an engine of faith.
Engineered awe.
Precisely. The entire experience of approaching and viewing the statue seems to have been meticulously engineered to bridge that conceptual gap between the human and the divine. The colossal scale within the dark, enclosed temple was designed specifically to overwhelm your senses.
Hmm.
The gleaming, almost unnaturally luminous materials of gold and ivory, lit perhaps by flickering torchlight or shafts of sunlight filtering in, would have appeared utterly sacred, numinous, ethereal.
And that masterstroke, the reflecting oil pool.
Yeah. Would have created an unstable, shimmering image, maybe making the god appear to float slightly, enhancing that otherworldly effect. This wasn't meant to be a passive viewing experience like looking at a painting in a gallery. It was designed as an active, engineered epiphany.
Epiphany.
Yes, an experience designed to make the abstract concept of a supreme deity tangibly, overwhelmingly present. And in doing so, it powerfully reinforced the sanctity of Olympia itself and the entire Greek religious worldview it represented.
An engine of faith. I like that.
Yeah.
But of course, like all engines, eventually it stopped running. After nearly a millennium, think about that, almost 1,000 years of presiding over its sanctuary, the statue of Zeus ultimately vanished.
Staggering length of time.
And its disappearance really marks a pivotal moment in history, doesn't it? It kind of symbolizes the twilight of the classical pagan world. But the actual circumstances of its destruction are truly shrouded in mystery. We have conflicting, often poorly substantiated accounts. It basically leaves us with two primary theories about what happened.
And the historical context for the statue's loss is undeniable. It's the systematic suppression of paganism following the Christianization of the Roman Empire. This profound cultural transformation was codified, made official, through a series of imperial edicts that deliberately dismantled the institutional foundations of traditional Greek and Roman religion.
Right. Things changed drastically.
Hugely. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius I issued a comprehensive ban on all pagan cults and sacrifices throughout the empire. No more worshiping the old gods officially.
And that directly led to the abolition of the ancient Olympic Games themselves, didn't it?
Precisely. In 393 CE. The games were seen, quite rightly from a Christian perspective, as a deeply pagan festival honoring Zeus. So, with its central religious function eliminated, the sanctuary at Olympia inevitably fell into disuse and decay. The lights basically went out.
And then came the final legislative blow.
Yes. In 426 CE, Emperor Theodosius II, grandson of Theodosius I, ordered the outright destruction of all remaining pagan temples. This edict effectively sealed the fate of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. It marked the point at which it was officially abandoned, deconsecrated, and subject to demolition or ruin.
Okay, so with that context, let's look at the first theory for the statue's disappearance.
Yeah.
This is what some call the plausible narrative, destruction right there at Olympia. This seems to align quite closely with the documented history you just outlined.
It does. Both historical references and archaeological evidence point towards a sequence of destructive events happening at the site itself. We know the temple was severely damaged by a major fire, dated archaeologically to around 425 CE.
Just before Theodosius II's decree. Coincidence?
Probably not. It aligns very closely with that anti-pagan decree and was very likely the result of state-sanctioned destruction. Zealots, perhaps soldiers, fulfilling the imperial order. And given the statue's construction, that large internal wooden framework, the ivory, maybe other flammable materials, it's highly improbable that it could have survived such a massive conflagration inside the temple.
So the fire might have been the end right there. But even if it somehow survived the fire, there were other destructive forces at play, natural disasters.
Right. Yes. Even if some part of the statue or temple remained after the fire, the final ruination of the site was pretty much ensured by a series of powerful earthquakes that rocked the region in 522 and 551 CE. We can see the evidence today. The temple's massive stone columns are lying toppled like dominoes.
Wow. And wasn't it something about tsunamis too?
Yes, more recent geoarchaeological research paints an even bleaker picture. It suggests that repeated tsunamis rolling inland from the coast, perhaps triggered by those earthquakes, may have inundated the site, burying the ruins under several meters of river silt and clay, just covered over.
So, fire, earthquakes, floods, a trifecta of destruction. But there's even a twist within this destruction at Olympia theory, suggesting human hands might have been involved in the final collapse, even after the fire, and maybe before the big quakes.
That's a refinement based on some recent structural analyses of how the columns fell. Some researchers have cast doubt on the earthquake-only hypothesis for the complete collapse. They argue the pattern of collapse in some areas is inconsistent with purely seismic forces.
Meaning?
meaning it leads to the alternative or perhaps complementary theory that the last standing columns, maybe weakened by fire or earlier tremors, were intentionally pulled down with ropes by human hands. Perhaps during the early Byzantine period, a final symbolic act of dismantling the pagan sanctuary, clearing the site.
Okay, so under any of these scenarios within Theory 1, fire, earthquake, deliberate demolition, or some combination, the statue would have met its end in situ, right there at Olympia.
That's the conclusion of this theory, yes. It was destroyed along with its temple.
Okay, now let's turn to Theory 2. This is the more, shall we say, dramatic, maybe even romantic narrative. The idea that the statue was removed to Constantinople and eventually destroyed in the fire of the Lajan Palace. But this one seems based almost entirely on a much later source.
That's the main issue, yes. This narrative is based almost entirely on a tradition recorded by an 11th century Byzantine historian named Georgios Kadrenos. He was writing over 600 years after the event supposedly took place.
600 years is a long time for a story to change. What does Kadrenos claim?
According to his account, sometime after the sanctuary at Olympia was officially closed, so late 4th or early 5th century CE, the statue wasn't destroyed, but was instead carefully disassembled, transported all the way to Constantinople, the new capital of the Eastern Roman Empire.
That would have been an immense undertaking.
Absolutely huge. And there, in Constantinople, it allegedly became the prized possession in the magnificent private art collection of a wealthy and powerful court official named Lausus. He served as imperial chamberlain under Theodosius II, the same emperor who ordered the destruction of temples back in Greece.
Oh, the irony.
Indeed. Lausus's palace was apparently renowned for housing some of the most famous, stolen, or relocated masterpieces of classical sculpture, things like Praxiteles' famous Aphrodite of Cnidus. These statues had been removed from their original temple context and were displayed essentially as secular works of art, trophies of the classical past.
Okay, so Zeus becomes part of this private collection in the capital, and the tragic end to this version of the story.
According to Kadrenos, the entire fabulous collection, along with the palace of Lausus itself, was tragically and completely destroyed in a great fire that consumed a large part of Constantinople in the year 475 CE. So Zeus survived the fall of Olympia, only to perish in a fire in Constantinople decades later.
Okay, two very different fates. How do scholars generally weigh these two theories today? What's the assessment? Is the Constantinople story given much credence?
Generally, no. The Constantinople theory, while certainly more dramatic and intriguing, rests on extremely tenuous evidence. The key problem is the complete lack of any contemporary 5th century accounts mentioning such a monumental and logistically challenging removal and reassembly of the statue. You'd think someone at the time would have written about moving one of the 7 wonders of the world to the imperial capital.
Good point. Crickets.
Pretty much. The story only appears those 6 centuries later in Kadrenos' chronicle. The theory of destruction at Olympia, conversely, aligns much, much more closely with the documented historical trajectory of the sanctuary, its violent suppression, its official closure, its documented damage by fire, and its eventual physical ruin by both human and natural forces that are well attested archaeologically.
So it sounds like the mystery of its fate is, in itself, historically significant, the fact that we don't have a clear record.
It absolutely is. The very absence of a clear, contemporary record of the destruction of one of the ancient world's most famous objects is a stark testament to the cultural upheaval, the breakdown of record-keeping, maybe just the sheer chaos of the 5th century CE Roman Empire. Things were falling apart.
And maybe the competing narratives tell us something about how later cultures processed this loss.
That's a fascinating way to look at it. The competing narratives can perhaps be seen as reflecting different ways the subsequent Byzantine culture grappled with the loss of the classical pagan past. The Olympia theory presents a narrative of, essentially, religious conflict and inevitable decay. The old pagan world is violently erased by Christian decree and they left to be buried by nature. Straightforward supersession.
Whereas the Constantinople theory?
The Constantinople theory offers a more complex narrative, one of cultural appropriation and preservation, followed by accidental loss. Here, the statue is saved from its pagan context, it's secularized as a prized work of art in the new Christian capital, and then tragically lost to a contingent event, a fire.
Why would that narrative persist if the evidence is weak?
Well, its persistence, despite the weak basis, might reflect a Byzantine desire to claim the great masterpieces of antiquity for their own capital. It makes the loss of the Zeus a tragedy central to their history, Constantinople's history, rather than just a forgotten event in a defunct provincial sanctuary way out in Greece. It brings the wonder into their story.
Fascinating. So the mystery of the statue's fate is really a direct consequence of the profound historical rupture, the shift from paganism to Christianity that it got caught right in the middle of.
That seems a very fair assessment. It was lost in the transition.
Despite its complete physical disappearance, though, the cultural and artistic legacy of the Olympian Zeus has proven remarkably resilient, hasn't it? Its fame in antiquity alone ensured its place on those canonical lists of the seven wonders of the world.
Oh, absolutely. It was a fixture on the earliest guidebooks for travelers in the Hellenistic world. Those lists of themata or thamata, sites or wonders compiled by writers like Antipater of Sidon and Philo of Byzantium back in the 2nd century BCE.
And within that very exclusive list, which included architectural marvels like the Pyramids of Giza, the Hanging Gardens, the Lighthouse of Alexandria stuff, the statue of Zeus really stood out, didn't it? Primarily for its supreme artistic merit and the profound religious experience it invoked.
That's right. It's interesting that 5 of the 7 traditional wonders were, in fact, testaments to the artistic and engineering prowess of the Greeks, reflecting a Hellenocentric view, perhaps. And Phidias' Zeus was arguably seen as the absolute artistic pinnacle among them. It represented the height of human ability to depict the divine.
But this is where it gets really interesting, I think. Beyond its place on lists of wonders, the statue's most profound and lasting impact was truly iconic. Phidias' creation didn't just depict Zeus. It fundamentally defined the visual identity of the king of the gods for the entire Greco-Roman civilization, and arguably for subsequent Western culture.
That's its true immortality, isn't it? That image, the majestic, bearded, enthroned patriarch radiating calm authority, became the standard visual shorthand for supreme divine power. It was the way to show the top god. And this model was widely disseminated across the ancient world through countless imitations, big and small on coins, engraved gems, smaller-scale sculptures, terracotta figurines. Everyone knew what Zeus was supposed to look like, thanks to Phidias.
And this potent visual archetype, incredibly, was later absorbed and repurposed by early Christian art, right? This seems amazing. As Christianity evolved from, a persecuted sect to the dominant state religion, it needed a visual language. It needed to depict Christ not just as a humble teacher or a suffering martyr, but as the cosmic ruler, the judge of all.
Exactly. And the established iconography of the enthroned Phidian Zeus provided this ready-made, universally understood visual model for supreme benevolent authority. So the image of Christ Pantocrator, meaning ruler of all, which became absolutely central to Byzantine and later Orthodox Christian art.
The image you see in the domes of churches.
Precisely. That bearded, enthroned figure, often holding a book instead of a scepter, making a gesture of blessing. It owes a clear and significant visual debt to the language Phidias established for Zeus centuries earlier. The pagan god's image provided the template for the Christian god figure's authority.
That is genuinely mind-blowing.
It is, and this classical ideal of divine representation, embodied by the memory of Phidias' Zeus, was even rekindled during the Renaissance and later during Neoclassicism, periods that look directly back to the art of antiquity for inspiration. Artists and sculptors reading those ancient descriptions by Pausanias and others were inspired by the very concept of a monumental figure capable of commanding such universal reverence.
So even though there are no surviving fragments of the statue itself, unlike some other wonders where we have bits and pieces, all our modern visualizations are interpretive reconstructions.
Yes, entirely. They have to be based on a careful synthesis of those literary descriptions, particularly Pausanias, and also evidence from coins struck at Ilies, which depict the statue, albeit in miniature and probably simplified. These reconstructions range from, imaginative 19th century engravings to sophisticated contemporary digital 3D models.
I've seen some of those digital models trying to capture the interior.
Yes, while high-fidelity 3D reconstructions have understandably focused more on things like the temple's pedimental sculptures, for which we actually have physical fragments, numerous conceptual models have sought to recreate the temple's interior and convey something of the awe-inspiring presence of the statue within that space, trying to capture that feeling Strabo talked about.
And as conceptual echoes, the idea of that seated authority figure can even be seen in much more modern monumental sculptures, can't they? Ones trying to convey a similar sense of solemn, revered authority.
I think the most notable and often cited example is Daniel Chester French's famous statue of Abraham Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C.
Ah, yes. I can see that completely.
It consciously employs much the same seated patriarchal pose, the same sense of contemplative gravity, to convey the wisdom and foundational importance of a nation's leader. It's not a direct copy, of course, but the visual echo of Phidias' Zeus, representing supreme just authority, is undeniably there.
Which really highlights the ultimate legacy of the statue of Zeus, doesn't it? It's one of conceptual persistence. The physical object was utterly destroyed, vanished without a trace.
Annihilated.
But the powerful visual archetype of divine authority that Phidias created was so effective, so resonant, that it somehow detached itself from its original context, its original medium of gold and ivory.
It became an idea, a visual trope.
Exactly. An idea strong enough to cross that profound religious divide between paganism and Christianity. And it continues, maybe subconsciously, to inform our visual culture of power and authority even today.
It really does. When you think about it, of the seven wonders, the Zeus is among the most completely lost physically. There's literally nothing left. Yet its core idea, Phidias' brilliant visual solution to the problem of representing supreme power in a form that is both awe-inspiring and somehow benevolent, that proved to be indestructible.
The masterpiece vanished, but the master's idea of God, in a way, proved immortal.
Beautifully put. That's the enduring legacy.
So, wrapping this up, the statue of Zeus at Olympia. It really stands as this profound testament to artistic genius, incredible engineering prowess, and an age of intense religious devotion. It literally defined divinity for an entire age and had this undeniably profound transformative impact on its ancient viewers. Its complete physical loss remains a historical enigma, a puzzle. Yet its enduring fame and its deep visual legacy continue to resonate, even shaping our modern conceptions of authority in ways we might not even realize.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? That while physical creations, no matter how solid they seem, how monumental, can eventually crumble to dust or be lost to fire or flood, the ideas they embody, the images they define, can achieve a kind of immortality. They can continue to shape our perceptions and our culture for millennia.
So, maybe thinking about what this all means for us. Perhaps the true wonder of Phidias' Zeus isn't just the magnificent object we lost, but the enduring power of an idea. An idea so potent it was capable of crossing centuries, crossing cultures, even shaping the face of the divine in its wake. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, what other lost wonders, what other vanished creations have left their own invisible yet indelible marks on our world today?
That's a fascinating thought to end on. The unseen legacies of lost masterpieces.